The evening was quiet inside the grand mansion. A house so large and filled with expensive things that anyone who stepped inside felt small. The walls were lined with paintings worth more than what most people earned in a lifetime. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, and the air carried the smell of polished wood and fresh flowers. The maid worked silently, as she had done for years, cleaning, arranging, making sure everything was in place before the guests arrived. But tonight she was not alone. Her daughter, a girl of 16, had come along, not because she wanted to but because her mother had no choice. Sometimes the mother could not leave her daughter at home, and the billionaire had allowed her to sit quietly in the kitchen whenever she visited. The girl was used to being ignored in the mansion. No one paid attention to her. She was the maid's daughter, and in a house where powerful men and women discussed millions, she was invisible. But sometimes being invisible was an advantage, because when no one sees you, you see everything. That night, as her mother worked in silence, the girl's sharp eyes caught things that others missed. She noticed the footsteps echoing in the wrong direction, the faint creak of a door that no one had entered, and the low whisper of voices where there should have been none. At first, she thought she was imagining it. After all, the house was so big that sounds often played tricks. But then she saw movement in the long hallway, a shadow slipping past the golden light of the chandelier. She froze. Her heart began to beat faster, but she did not want to alarm her mother. Her mother was already nervous, always reminding her to behave, to stay silent, to never make a scene. This was not their house. They were only here to work, to serve. The girl sat in the kitchen, her small hands gripping the edge of the chair, listening carefully. She heard a faint click, like the sound of glass against glass, then another whisper. She rose slowly, careful not to make noise, and peeked around the corner. From where she stood, she could just see part of the dining room where the table was being set for the evening. She saw a hand move quickly away from one of the glasses. It was not her mother's hand. Her mother was in the pantry. This hand belonged to someone else, someone who moved like they were hiding something. The girl's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to call out, but fear gripped her. Who would listen to her? She was just a maid's daughter. If she spoke up and was wrong, her mother could lose her job, maybe even be thrown out of the house forever. Yet her instincts screamed that something was not right. She backed into the kitchen, her face pale, her lips trembling. Her mother noticed immediately. "What happened?" her mother whispered, concerned. The girl shook her head quickly. She leaned close and whispered two words that carried more weight than a scream. "Don't speak." Her mother frowned, not understanding, but the girl's eyes were wide with fear, her body tense like she was holding a dangerous secret. The mother wanted to ask more, but something in her daughter's face told her to stay quiet. The girl sat back down, but she could not stay still. Her legs bounced nervously, her ears straining to catch every sound. The mansion, which had always seemed like a beautiful palace, now felt like a trap. The glittering chandeliers seemed too bright, as if they were hiding darker corners. The air felt heavy, filled with something unsaid. Every little sound made her jump, the clinking of cutlery, the shutting of a door, the soft laughter of arriving guests. She felt like she was the only one who could sense danger, like everyone else was blind. She watched her mother carry trays and adjust the table settings, and she wanted to run over and pull her away, but she could not. She knew that silence was safer. She knew she had to wait for the right moment. As she sat there, memories flashed through her mind. She remembered her mother's warnings. Keep your head down, don't attract attention, don't make rich people angry. But she also remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her about courage, about how sometimes even a small act of bravery could change the fate of someone important. She felt torn between fear and duty, between staying silent and protecting someone's life. The longer she sat, the stronger the feeling grew that something terrible was about to happen. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, but she pressed her lips together. She whispered the words again under her breath, "Don't speak," almost like she was reminding herself that sometimes silence was louder than noise. Her eyes returned to the hallway where she had seen the shadow. She was sure of what she had witnessed. Someone had touched that glass. Someone had done something they should not have done. And if she was right, the billionaire, The man who owned this mansion, the man who trusted her mother, was in danger. The girl didn't know how she would prove it. She didn't know how she would stop it. All she knew was that she had seen the truth with her own eyes, and the truth could not be ignored. In that moment, she realized she was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was the only one who could save a life. And so she waited, her heart pounding like a drum, her mind racing with fear and courage mixed together. She stayed quiet, watching, listening, waiting for the moment when she would have to act. The words she had whispered to her mother hung in the air like a secret spell, fragile and powerful at the same time. Don't speak. The billionaire lived a life that many people could only dream about. Every morning his schedule was planned down to the minute. Every detail of his day polished like the shining cars in his garage. From the outside, it looked like perfection. He woke up at the same time every morning, exercised in his private gym, ate a breakfast prepared by top chefs, and then spent hours locked inside his office making decisions that affected companies, markets, and thousands of workers. To the world he was powerful, confident, and untouchable. But behind that polished image, he carried a heavy weight, loneliness that no one ever spoke about. He had money, respect, and influence, but he did not have someone to truly trust. People surrounded him all the time, smiling at him, shaking his hand, praising his intelligence, but deep inside he knew most of them wanted something from him. Some wanted a job, some wanted an opportunity, others wanted his downfall. That was the curse of being rich. He was admired, but he was also hated. The one person he trusted was his maid, a quiet woman who had served him for years. She never asked for anything, never crossed boundaries, never betrayed his confidence. She cleaned the rooms, arranged the table, and treated his home as carefully as if it were her own. Perhaps that was why he allowed her daughter to visit sometimes, to sit quietly in the kitchen while her mother worked. He knew the girl was harmless, innocent, just a child. She reminded him of a life he had never had, simple, unpolished, but real. That evening was supposed to be just another routine dinner. A handful of business partners were coming over, men who wore expensive suits and carried briefcases filled with numbers and contracts. To them, the billionaire was not just a man but an opportunity, a stepping stone to wealth or power. The dining table was set with shining silver cutlery, crystal glasses, and candles that flickered softly. Everything looked elegant, controlled, and perfect, exactly how he liked it. The billionaire entered the dining room with his usual calm face, the kind of face that revealed nothing. He greeted his guests with a handshake, his voice deep but measured. No one could guess what he was truly thinking. He had mastered the art of silence, the art of watching others reveal themselves before he spoke. It was how he won in business. As the guests settled into their seats, laughter and small talk filled the room. The billionaire nodded at the right moments, but inside he was calculating. Every person at the table wanted something. One guest was desperate for investment. Another wanted to buy out a competitor. Another was seeking favors. They tried to hide it behind jokes and polite conversation, but he could see through them. He always did. The maid moved quietly between them, placing plates of food, filling glasses with wine, making sure everything was in order. No one noticed her, and that was the way it had always been. She had mastered silence just like her employer, though for different reasons. She knew her place, knew that in this house her job was to serve, not to be heard. Her daughter sat quietly in the kitchen, just as she had been told. But her eyes, sharper than most, missed nothing. She watched her mother move back and forth, watched the guests laughing at things that weren't truly funny, watched the billionaire pretending to enjoy himself. She could sense that something in the air was wrong, though no one else seemed to notice. The billionaire, for all his power, had no idea that danger sat at the same table with him. He thought tonight was about contracts and negotiations, about polite arguments that would end in deals. He did not know that someone had already made a darker plan. He reached for his glass absent-mindedly, the way he always did before the main course. His movements were smooth, almost practiced. To anyone watching, it was just another night. But for the maid's daughter, sitting in silence, it was not just another night. She remembered the shadow in the hallway, the hand that moved too quickly, the whisper she had heard. Her heart raced as she watched him lift the glass closer to his lips. No one else noticed, not the laughing guests, not even her mother. They were all too busy playing their roles. To the billionaire, this was routine. To the girl, this was the moment where everything could end. The billionaire thought he controlled his world, but the truth was, he was blind. He was a man sitting on a throne of glass, one crack away from disaster. And tonight, that crack had already appeared. He leaned back in his chair, listening to one of his guests brag about a new business move. His face remained calm, but his mind was already working, calculating profits and losses. He did not notice the way the maid's daughter clenched her fists in the kitchen, her body shaking with the urge to act. He did not notice the way her eyes never left his glass. If he had looked carefully, if he had seen the fear on her young face, perhaps he would have understood that tonight was different. But billionaires often live inside a bubble, and his bubble made him believe that danger was always far away, never this close, never inside his own house. The room buzzed with laughter, the sound of forks against plates, the smell of expensive dishes filling the air. It was routine. It was ordinary. But beneath that surface, something extraordinary was about to happen. The billionaire did not know that his life was no longer in his own hands. It rested in the hands of someone he would have never expected. The maid's daughter, the girl sitting silently in the kitchen, the one who was supposed to be invisible. She had seen the truth, and he had not. She was ready to break the routine, while he believed he was safe in it. And so the evening continued, the billionaire smiling politely, the guests laughing too loudly, the maid serving quietly, and the girl watching with eyes wide open. The difference was that the billionaire thought it was just another night. The girl knew it was not. The routine was about to shatter. The dinner table sparkled under the golden light of the chandelier, every detail polished to perfection. The glasses stood neatly in a row, their rims catching the light like thin circles of fire. The silverware shone, the napkins were folded in delicate shapes, and the candles flickered gently, throwing soft shadows across the long table. To the guests, it looked like another evening of luxury, another meal inside the home of a billionaire. But to the maid's daughter, sitting silently in the kitchen doorway, it looked like something else, like a stage where danger was waiting to perform. She had already noticed the strange movement earlier, a hand slipping away too quickly, a shadow moving when no one should have been there. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the feeling in her chest told her it was real. Now, as the dinner went on, her eyes stayed locked on one particular thing, the glass of wine in front of the billionaire. It seemed like an ordinary glass, filled with deep red liquid that caught the light. The guests lifted their own glasses easily, sipping without worry, but the girl could not take her eyes off his. Something about it was wrong. She had seen something dropped inside, just a small pinch of powder that melted and disappeared in seconds. It was almost invisible, but she had sharp eyes, eyes trained from years of noticing the little things her mother missed while cleaning. Dust in corners, crumbs under chairs, smudges on glass. She noticed details others ignored, and tonight that gift became her curse, because she had seen something she could not unsee. Her stomach tightened. She wanted to stand up and shout, to warn him not to drink, but her voice caught in her throat. Who would believe her? She was just a maid's daughter, a girl with no place at this table. If she accused someone in front of these powerful men, they would laugh at her, maybe even punish her mother for raising a rude and noisy child. And yet, if she stayed silent, she feared she would watch a man fall to the floor before her eyes. The billionaire lifted his hand toward the glass once, then set it back down as he continued to talk with his guests. Every time he reached for it, the girl's heart skipped a beat. Her palms grew sweaty, and her breathing grew heavy, but no one noticed her. To them, she was invisible, just like always. The voices around the table grew louder, laughter echoing across the high ceilings. The guests were relaxed, enjoying themselves, their attention fixed on the man at the head of the table. They toasted to success, to new beginnings, to promises that might not even be kept. Each sip they took made the girl's fear worse, because it meant the billionaire would soon drink too. The girl leaned forward in her chair, her hands trembling. She remembered the way the hand had moved near the glass earlier, quick and sneaky. She remembered the faint sound, like something small being dropped into liquid. It was not her imagination. She was sure of it now. The glass was poisoned. Her mother passed by her with a tray, her face calm and tired, focused on her work. The girl wanted to grab her arm, to tell her the truth, but fear sealed her lips. Her mother had told her countless times, "Keep your head down, don't get involved." If she told her mother now, her mother would scold her and tell her to stay quiet. And yet, inside, the girl's heart was screaming. The billionaire's hand moved again. This time he wrapped his fingers around the glass, lifting it slightly. The deep red wine swirled under the light. The girl's throat went dry. She pressed her fists against her knees to stop herself from jumping up. Time seemed to move slowly, every second stretching into eternity. She could almost see it. The terrible picture in her mind of him taking a sip, coughing, gasping, falling to the ground while the room filled with panic. She imagined his powerful figure collapsing, his face pale, his eyes wide with confusion. The thought made her chest hurt. She whispered under her breath, the same words she had whispered before, "Don't speak." But this time the words were not just for her mother, they were for herself too. She needed to stay calm. She needed to wait, to watch, to find the right moment. If she spoke too soon, she might fail. If she spoke too late, it might be over. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the one who had poisoned the glass. But everyone looked the same, smiling, laughing, pretending to be friendly. Their faces revealed nothing. It could have been any of them. The girl realized she was not just fighting against danger. She was fighting against silence, against secrets hidden behind polished smiles. The billionaire lifted the glass higher, almost to his lips, before setting it down again as one of his guests told a story that made everyone laugh. The girl's body ached with tension. She could not sit still any longer. She leaned forward, her nails digging into the wooden chair, her eyes never leaving that cursed glass. The maid's daughter was not rich, not powerful, not important in this house. But at that moment, she was the only one who knew the truth. A truth so heavy it nearly crushed her. A truth that could save a life, or destroy hers if no one believed her. She swallowed hard, her young mind racing, her heart thundering inside her chest. She knew she had little time left. If she waited too long, it would be too late. The suspicious discovery she had made now burned in her memory, clearer than anything she had ever seen in her life. The poisoned glass waiting patiently, deadly and silent, in front of the most powerful man she had ever known. And as the candles flickered and the laughter echoed, she understood one thing. Sooner or later, she would have to act. The dining room was filled with light and laughter, but inside the maid's daughter's heart there was only noise, the pounding of fear that refused to calm down. She sat there, her small body tense, her eyes fixed on the glass of wine in front of the billionaire. She knew what she had seen, she knew what it meant, but she did not know what to do. Every second that passed made the decision heavier, harder, more dangerous. Her thoughts went back and forth like a storm. She could run to her mother and tell her the truth. But what if her mother did not believe her? What if her mother thought she was only imagining things, or worse, scolded her for speaking out? Her mother had always warned her to stay quiet, to never interfere in things that were above her. And truly, what could a maid's daughter say in a room full of powerful men? She imagined standing up and pointing at the glass. In her mind, she heard herself shouting, "Don't drink it. It's poisoned." But then she imagined what would happen next. The guests would laugh at her, the billionaire would frown, her mother would look horrified, and she would be dragged out for causing a scene. She would be called a liar, a foolish child who ruined an important dinner. And after that, her mother might lose her job, and they would both be left with nothing. But then the other picture came to her mind, darker and scarier. She imagined the billionaire raising the glass, drinking deeply, and then coughing, choking, his face turning pale. She imagined the guests screaming, the house filling with chaos, her mother dropping her tray in shock. And she imagined herself standing in the corner, frozen, knowing she could have stopped it but said nothing. That thought was worse than losing a job. That thought burned inside her like fire. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of her chair. She pressed her lips together, whispering to herself, "Don't speak." It had become like a spell, words to calm herself, words to keep her hidden. But now those same words felt like a cage. If she kept silent, she might let a man die. If she spoke, she might destroy her life and her mother's life. The choice tore her apart. She looked at her mother, moving gracefully with the tray, her face calm and professional. The maid had no idea what storm her daughter was holding inside. For a moment, the girl wanted to cry out, to beg her mother to believe her. But she stayed silent. The fear was too strong. Her eyes returned to the billionaire. He was listening to one of his guests, his face calm, his hand resting near the glass. He had no idea that his life balanced on the edge of a decision being made not by himself, not by his wealthy friends, not even by his loyal maid, but by a girl sitting quietly in the corner. The thought made the girl's chest tighten. She was just a maid's daughter, yet tonight she carried more power than anyone else in the room. Her mind raced with questions. What if she was wrong? What if the powder she saw was harmless, just sugar or some strange ingredient? What if her fear was only a trick of her imagination? And yet, deep down, she knew it was not imagination. She trusted her eyes. She trusted her instincts. The girl clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She tried to summon courage, to imagine herself standing tall and speaking clearly. But her voice felt stuck in her throat. Every time she thought of opening her mouth, she imagined the angry faces of the guests, the sharp eyes of the billionaire, the shame in her mother's eyes. It was easier to stay quiet. But easier did not mean right. Inside her head, two voices argued. One voice whispered, "Stay silent. Protect your mother. Protect yourself." The other voice shouted, "Speak. Save him. This is your chance to do something that matters." The two voices clashed again and again, louder with each second, until she felt like her skull would burst. The billionaire's hand touched the glass again, and the girl's heart nearly stopped. Time seemed to slow. She could see every detail, the reflection of the candle in the wine, the way his fingers curled around the stem, the slight tilt of his wrist. She was seconds away from watching him drink. Her whole body screamed to act, but her fear chained her to the chair. Sweat dripped down her forehead. Her breathing grew fast, shallow, almost painful. She looked around the room desperately, but no one noticed her. They were all too busy laughing, talking, eating. They were blind. She was the only one who saw the truth. In that moment, she realized something. Courage did not mean being unafraid. Courage meant being afraid and acting anyway. Her grandmother had told her stories like that. Stories of people who were terrified but still chose to do the right thing. Now it was her turn. If she stayed silent, she would never forgive herself. Her lips trembled as she whispered again, "Don't speak." But this time she understood. She had to break that rule. She had to find her voice, even if no one believed her. The billionaire's life depended on it. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she leaned forward, ready to act, ready to risk everything. Fear filled her like a storm, but courage burned through it like fire. She was still trembling, still unsure, but inside she knew one thing with certainty. She could not let him drink. And so she prepared herself for the moment that was coming, the moment where her small voice would have to rise above the laughter of the room, the moment where a maid's daughter would stand against silence, against fear, against the weight of power. The struggle inside her was not over, but she was closer to her choice. The line between fear and courage was thin, and she was about to cross it. The billionaire's hand rested on the glass again, his fingers curling around the thin stem as he listened to the man beside him telling a story that made everyone at the table laugh. His deep voice joined the laughter for a moment, and then, without a second thought, he began to lift the glass toward his lips. To the guests, it was nothing. To the maid, it was nothing. But to her daughter sitting quietly in the kitchen doorway, it was everything. Her heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this was the moment. She could not wait any longer. Every second felt like a hammer hitting inside her chest. If she stayed silent now, the glass would touch his lips, The poisoned liquid would slide into his mouth, and by the time anyone realized, it would be too late. Her small hands trembled on her lap. She wanted to scream, to shout the truth, but the fear of being ignored, of being laughed at, of ruining everything still chained her. She could see her mother's face if she spoke, angry, disappointed, scared of losing her job. She could hear the guests mocking her, calling her a silly child who didn't belong at the table. All of that fear was heavy, pressing down on her. But heavier still was the picture in her mind of the billionaire falling lifeless to the ground. The glass rose higher. The candlelight shone through the red wine, casting a dark glow across the billionaire's face. The girl's throat burned. She bit her lip until it almost bled, her whole body shaking. She knew she had no time left. It was now or never. Her legs moved before her mind made the choice. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. The sound made her mother turn quickly, her eyes wide in warning. The girl ignored it. Something inside her had snapped, broken free from the chains of fear. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the glass. Her lips parted, but the words stuck again. The room was full of voices, laughter, and clinking cutlery. No one would hear her small voice. And so, she did the only thing she could. She rushed forward, her hand shooting out across the table, and knocked the glass from the billionaire's hand. The sound was sharp, shocking. The crystal shattered against the marble floor, red wine spreading across the carpet like spilled blood. The laughter stopped instantly. The room went silent. Everyone stared at the maid's daughter, their mouths open, their eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, no one spoke. The guests looked at one another, confused and angry. One man muttered something about clumsy children. Another shook his head, rolling his eyes. The maid gasped, her face turning pale. She rushed to her daughter, pulling her back, whispering harshly, "What have you done?" The girl's hands shook. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out, her eyes never leaving the billionaire. "Don't drink it," she said softly, almost a whisper, but the words carried through the silent room. "Please, don't drink it." The guests erupted with questions. "What nonsense is this?" one said angrily. "She ruined the dinner," another shouted. Some even laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. But the billionaire did not laugh. He did not shout. He did not even look angry. He stared at the girl with sharp, curious eyes. He had lived his whole life reading people. Business rivals, politicians, investors. He knew when someone was lying, when someone was bluffing, when someone was desperate. And right now, looking into the trembling eyes of this maid's daughter, he saw something he could not ignore. She was terrified, but she was telling the truth. The maid pulled her daughter close, whispering apologies, begging for forgiveness, but the billionaire raised his hand to stop her. "Wait," he said calmly, his deep voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent again. He pointed at the spilled wine. "Bring another glass. From the same bottle." His tone was steady, commanding. The maid froze, unsure, but obeyed. She poured a new glass of wine, her hands shaking, and set it in front of him. But he did not drink. Instead, he turned to one of his security men. "Test it." The guests exchanged nervous glances. Their laughter was gone now, replaced with unease. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his eyes still on the maid's daughter, who stood trembling but unflinching. Time stretched painfully as the test was done, every second heavy with tension. Finally, the result came back. The wine was poisoned. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Gasps filled the air. Some guests stood up in shock, others whispered in fear. The maid's knees buckled, and she clutched her daughter tightly, realizing what had almost happened. The billionaire's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. He looked around the table at the people he had called partners, friends, associates. One of them had planned his death tonight. The realization cut deeper than any knife. But he did not let anger show. Instead, he looked back at the girl. She was still shaking, her wide eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. She had saved his life. A maid's daughter, invisible to everyone else, had become the only reason he was still alive. The billionaire gave her a small nod, a sign of respect, a silent thank you. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly, relief washing over her at last. She had risked everything, and she had been right. Her fear had nearly stopped her, but in the end, her courage had broken through. The glass lay shattered on the floor, the dark stains spreading wider across the carpet. It was a reminder of how close death had come, of how fragile even the most powerful life could be. And it was also proof that sometimes, the smallest voice, the smallest act, could change everything. The sound of the broken glass still echoed in the grand dining room. The spilled wine looked like blood on the white carpet, and everyone stared at it in shock. The maid's daughter stood frozen, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with fear. For a moment, no one moved. The guests whispered among themselves, their voices sharp with confusion and anger. Some thought it was an accident, others thought it was childish clumsiness, but no one imagined the truth, not yet. Then the billionaire spoke, his calm voice carrying more weight than all their arguments. He had ordered the wine to be tested, and the result had come back clear. Poison. The word spread through the room like fire, burning away the laughter, burning away the false smiles. The guests gasped, some recoiled in fear, and others shifted nervously in their chairs. The truth was out. Someone at that table had tried to kill him. The maid dropped to her knees, clutching her daughter, her face pale with terror. She whispered apologies again and again, begging the billionaire to forgive the girl for interrupting, for making a scene. But he did not look at the mother. His eyes stayed on the daughter, sharp and steady. She had seen what no one else had seen, and she had dared to act when even grown men would have stayed silent. The security guards moved quickly, their eyes scanning the room, their hands ready for action. The guests began to protest loudly, each one swearing they had nothing to do with it. "This is madness," one shouted. "How could poison end up in his glass?" another cried. Their voices overlapped, their fear growing by the second. The billionaire did not shout, did not lose control. He leaned back in his chair, his powerful presence filling the room even more than before. He had been betrayed, and yet he remained steady, watching every face, listening to every excuse. He knew that liars revealed themselves not in their words, but in their fear. The girl, still holding her mother's arm, watched as the guests argued and pointed fingers. She felt small, but at the same time she felt something strange, power. She had spoken the truth, and now everyone was forced to see it. No one could ignore her anymore. She was no longer invisible. One of the guests slammed his fist on the table, his face red with anger. "This is outrageous. I came here for business, not accusations." But his voice trembled slightly, and the billionaire noticed. Another man stayed too quiet, his eyes darting nervously, sweat dripping down his forehead. The billionaire noticed that too. Every detail was a clue, every reaction a piece of the puzzle. The guards brought the wine bottle forward. The billionaire looked at it with cold eyes. "Pour for them," he ordered. The room froze. No one moved. The guests stared at him in disbelief. The meaning of his words was clear. If the wine was safe, they should have no fear drinking it. But if it was poisoned, the guilty one would reveal himself. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The maid's daughter felt her chest tighten as she watched the guests shift uncomfortably. One by one, they tried to laugh it off, to refuse politely, to claim they had already had enough. But their excuses only made the air colder. Finally, one man stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I will not be insulted like this," he shouted. His hands shook, his face pale. The billionaire's eyes locked onto him, sharp and unblinking. The room seemed to shrink around that one man, the weight of suspicion crushing him. The guards moved in, and within seconds, he was restrained. The truth came out quickly after that. The man had been desperate, drowning in debt, angry that the billionaire had refused him a deal months ago. In his mind, the only way to get what he wanted was to remove the billionaire altogether. He had planned carefully, waiting for the perfect chance. He had slipped the poison into the wine, confident that no one would notice. But he had not counted on the sharp eyes of a maid's daughter. As the confession spilled out, the room erupted into chaos. The guests shouted in disbelief, some standing, some backing away as if the poison itself might reach them. The maid covered her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was terrified, ashamed, but also relieved that her daughter's actions had been proven right. The billionaire remained still, his face unreadable. Inside, he felt a storm of emotions, anger at the betrayal, shock at how close he had come to death, and something else he had not expected, gratitude toward the young girl who had saved him. He looked at her again, really looked at her, and saw not just a maid's daughter but a girl with courage far beyond her years. The guards dragged the guilty man away, his shouts echoing through the hallway until they faded into silence. The dining room was left in uneasy quiet. The guests sat stiffly, their eyes lowered, their earlier arrogance gone. No one dared to laugh now. No one dared to move without the billionaire's permission. The girl stood trembling, unsure if she had done something wrong or something right. She had acted on instinct, on fear, and now the entire house was shaken because of it. But when the billionaire gave her a small nod, calm and deliberate, her heart lifted. It was not anger in his eyes. It was respect. The chaos of the night had revealed more than just a plot. It had revealed loyalty and betrayal, fear and bravery, silence and truth. And in the middle of it all stood the maid's daughter, the girl who had changed everything with one bold act. The room slowly settled, the air still heavy with the memory of what had almost happened. The broken glass was cleared away, but the stain on the carpet remained, a dark reminder that death had come close that night. Yet alongside it was another reminder. A girl's courage had been stronger than fear, stronger than betrayal. The billionaire knew his life had been saved by someone no one expected. And from that moment, things would never be the same. The dining room that had once been full of laughter now felt heavy and cold. The sound of the broken glass and the confession still lingered in the air. The guests sat stiffly, too shaken to speak freely, their eyes downcast as if afraid of meeting the billionaire's gaze. The guards had already dragged the guilty man away, but his shouts still echoed faintly in their ears. What was supposed to be a night of fine dining and business deals had turned into a night of betrayal, fear, and revelation. The maid held her daughter tightly, her hands trembling as much as her heart. She could not believe what had happened. Her little girl, the one she always told to stay quiet and invisible, had been the one to save the life of the most powerful man she worked for. Pride swelled in her chest, but fear pressed down heavier. She worried about what would happen now. Would the billionaire see her daughter's act as bravery, or as insolence? Would he be grateful, or angry that a child had disrupted his evening in front of wealthy guests? The girl, still pale and shaking, looked around the room. She had expected relief, maybe even joy, now that the truth was out. But instead she felt a strange emptiness. The danger had passed, but the fear had not left her body. She could still see the wine glass falling, hear the shatter, feel the heat of all the angry eyes on her. She knew she had done the right thing, but she also knew she had risked everything to do it. The billionaire sat quietly at the head of the table, his face calm, but his mind racing. He had spent his life building walls around himself, trusting only his judgment, believing he could see every threat before it arrived. Tonight, those walls had nearly collapsed. Death had been just a sip away. And yet, he had been saved, not by his money, not by his power, not by his guards, but by a girl no one noticed, a girl who was not even supposed to be in the room. The thought humbled him in a way he was not used to. The guests, still uneasy, began to speak in low voices. They praised the billionaire for his calmness, swore their loyalty, insisted they had known nothing about the plot. But their words sounded hollow, rehearsed. Trust had been broken, and it could not be repaired with easy promises. The billionaire knew it. He gave them a cold nod but said little. The man who had betrayed him was gone, but the doubt remained. Who else at that table had smiled while secretly wishing for his downfall? Meanwhile, the maid's daughter sat close to her mother, unsure of what would happen next. For a moment she thought the billionaire might send them both away, blaming them for the chaos. She imagined being thrown out of the mansion, her mother losing the only job that kept food on their table. But when she finally dared to lift her eyes toward him, she saw something she had never expected. He was looking at her not with anger, but with respect. Later, when the guests had been escorted out and the room had quieted, the billionaire asked for the maid and her daughter to stay. The girl's knees shook as she stepped forward. She expected harsh words, but instead he spoke gently, his voice low and steady. "You saved my life tonight," he said. The words struck her like a wave. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Not with such seriousness, not with such weight. Her mother fell to her knees immediately, tears spilling down her face, begging for forgiveness for her daughter's boldness. But the billionaire stood and walked closer, motioning for her to rise. "There is nothing to forgive," he said firmly. "Your daughter saw the truth when no one else did. She was braver than all of us." The maid's daughter felt her cheeks burn. She was not used to such attention, not used to her voice being heard. For so long she had been invisible, just a shadow behind her mother's work. Now the most powerful man in the city was telling her that she had changed everything. The billionaire promised that an investigation would continue, that those responsible would pay. But he also promised something else: protection. He told the maid that from now on, she and her daughter would never have to worry about losing their place. Their loyalty and bravery would not be forgotten. For the maid, it was more than she had ever dreamed of. For the girl, it was overwhelming. She had not acted to win rewards or promises. She had acted because she could not sit still while danger unfolded in front of her. Yet now her small act of courage had placed her in a story much larger than herself. In the days that followed, news spread quietly through the mansion staff. They whispered about the girl who had saved the billionaire. Some admired her bravery, some envied the attention she had received, and others could not believe the story at all. But the truth was simple: without her, the man they all served might not have lived to see the morning. The maid's daughter, however, did not let pride overtake her. She still helped her mother in small ways, still sat quietly when told. But inside her, something had changed. She no longer saw herself as invisible. She knew that even the smallest person could carry the greatest courage. The billionaire, too, was changed. He had always believed his strength came from power, money, and control. But now he understood that sometimes strength came from unexpected places, from innocence, from honesty, from the sharp eyes of a girl who refused to let fear win. He began to think differently about trust, about loyalty, about who truly stood beside him. The night of chaos had left scars, on his trust, on the memory of his guests, on the maid who had nearly lost her job. But it had also left something stronger. A bond that could not be broken, a reminder that courage can come from the most unlikely hearts. And so the aftermath of that night was not just about betrayal. It was about revelation. A revelation that sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very ones who can save it. The mansion was quiet again, but it was not the same kind of quiet as before. The laughter of the guests was gone, the clinking of glasses had stopped, and the heavy footsteps of the guards had faded. All that remained was the memory of what had happened, a memory that would never leave the walls of that house. The stain on the carpet where the poisoned wine had spilled had been cleaned, but it still felt like it was there, a silent reminder of how close death had come. The maid's daughter sat with her mother in the kitchen, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes still wide from the events of the night. She could hardly believe that it was over, that the billionaire was safe, and that she was still there, sitting quietly in the mansion that now felt different to her. For so long, she had thought of herself as invisible, a shadow in her mother's world. But now she knew she had been seen, truly seen. The billionaire walked into the room, no longer surrounded by his guests, no longer wearing the polite smile he used to hide behind. He looked tired, but his eyes were steady. He stood in front of the maid and her daughter, and for a moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy but not frightening. Then, slowly, he spoke. "You saved my life," he said again, his deep voice softer now, carrying not only gratitude but something else, respect. The maid bowed her head, whispering that her daughter had only acted out of foolish fear, that she had not meant to cause trouble. But the billionaire shook his head. No, he said firmly. It was not foolish. It was brave. Braver than anyone else in that room. His words silenced the mother's protests. The girl looked up at him, her cheeks warm, her heart racing. He stepped closer, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the floor. For a man who had built his life on power, on contracts, and on wealth, it was not easy to admit weakness. Yet tonight he did. I trusted the wrong people, he said quietly. But you saw the truth. And you acted when no one else would. The girl did not know what to say. She lowered her eyes again, whispering softly, I only did what I had to do. The billionaire almost smiled. It was rare for him to smile, but in that moment, he did. Sometimes, he said, that is exactly what makes a hero. From that night forward, things changed. The maid and her daughter were no longer treated as invisible. The billionaire made sure they were safe, that no one could harm them or take their place away. He did not speak about it openly in front of others, but inside he carried a silent promise, to protect the girl who had once whispered don't speak but had broken her own rule to save him. The bond between them was not like family, not like friendship, but something different, something forged in fear and fire. It was a bond built on silence, on a moment where words had been too dangerous, yet action had been louder than any voice. He knew he could trust her in a way he could not trust many others, because she had risked everything without expecting anything in return. The girl, too, felt changed. She still helped her mother, still walked quietly through the mansion, but she carried herself differently now. She was no longer just the maid's daughter in her own mind. She was someone who had seen danger, faced fear, and chosen courage. She no longer whispered don't speak out of fear, but held those words like a lesson. Sometimes silence was powerful. Sometimes silence kept you safe. But sometimes, breaking that silence was the only way to save a life. The billionaire often thought about that moment when the glass had almost touched his lips. He thought about how close he had been to losing everything, and how strange it was that his fate had rested not in the hands of his bodyguards, not in the loyalty of his rich partners, but in the eyes of a girl sitting quietly in the corner. It humbled him in ways money never could. It reminded him that no matter how high a man climbs, his life can be saved by the smallest, most overlooked person in the room. In the weeks that followed, the mansion returned to its normal rhythm, but the people inside it were different. The staff spoke softly of the girl's bravery, the guards looked at her with quiet respect, and even the guests who heard the story whispered about the maid's daughter who had saved a billionaire. The girl herself did not seek attention. She kept to herself, carrying the memory of that night not as a boast, but as a private truth she would never forget. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall gates of the mansion, the billionaire passed the girl in the hallway. He paused for a moment and said only 2 words, "Thank you." He did not need to say more. She nodded quietly, and their eyes met. It was not the look between a servant and a master, not between a child and a powerful man, but between 2 people who shared a secret bond that no one else could understand. That bond, born in silence and fear, was stronger than words. It was the bond of trust, of courage, of life itself. The maid's daughter would always remember the night she whispered don't speak and then found her voice anyway. The billionaire would always remember the girl who saw the truth when he did not. The girl who shattered his routine with one act of bravery. And though the world outside would never fully know the story, inside the mansion it lived on, whispered in quiet voices, carried in silent glances. A story of danger, of betrayal, of courage, and of a bond that would never be broken.